Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 402. Thank you for joining me today. Hope you guys have had a great week. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast. I have a lot to share with you guys. Just going to wrap up some things that we were talking about in the last podcast. And in the last podcast, we were talking about the Great Schism, the break between the separation between the Western Latin-speaking church and the Eastern Greek-speaking church. And I was explaining in the last podcast that this was the very first split in the Christian church, that a lot of people believe that the first time that the Christian church split was during the Protestant Reformation, but that's not true. The very first time that there was a split in the Christian church is the Great Schism that happened in the 11th century, and that was the split between the Western and Eastern Church. And we were talking about all the issues that were surrounding the split in the last podcast, the doctrinal issues, the issues of challenging the Pope's authority. The Greeks did not believe that the Pope had the sole authority over the church. There were the issues of the Eucharist, iconoclasm, the coronation of Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor or Roman Emperor in 800. These were all the issues that were driving the split between the Western and Eastern Church. But there was also a split that was going on politically. And during this period of time, it is, it's funny because we think about separation of church and state today, and you know, a lot of people believe that the First Amendment establishes the separation of church and state. The First Amendment absolutely does not establish the separation of church and state. But since the ratification of the First Amendment, there has been many legal rulings and case law that supports the separation of church and state. But the reason that separation in church and state is so important to us in the 21st century and in the United States is because the history of Western civilization, there has not been a separation of church and state. The church and the state were very heavily entwined with one another. And it is what I call the imperial church, starting with Constantine, and then the break of the church also had a break, a separation of empires, the Western and Eastern Empire, reflecting the break between the Western and Eastern Church. And we talked about all of this in a previous podcast I did. I guess it was about 3 months ago, and the podcast is called Rome, titled Rome. I'm not sure what number the podcast was, but I explained the political separation that was going on between the Eastern Empire and the new Western Empire founded by Charlemagne. I go back, I talk about Charlemagne's father, Pippin the Short, Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, the deposing of the last Merovingian king in the Merovingian dynasty, and the creation of the Carolingian dynasty. And we were going through and talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed of that Daniel interpreted. And the legs of iron represent Rome, but then the feet are partially iron and partially clay. And I was explaining to you when we were talking about this in those previous podcasts, there's just many people that believe many things, that conjecture around what the iron mixed with clay is. There's many different points of view, but everyone is pretty much understands that the head of gold was Babylon, the breast of silver was the Medo-Persian Empire, the thighs were the Greek Empire, and then the two legs separating a split. You have two different legs, that the separation of these two different legs represent the Western Empire, and then the Eastern Empire, which are Rome. And I explained in that podcast, if you go back and listen to that podcast titled Rome, when we're talking about this statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, I explained to you how many people, many Jews, I play the clips of Benjamin Netanyahu saying that America is Rome, that there's this belief that America is the new Rome. I explained all of that in that podcast. So that in that previous podcast 3 months ago, the episode Rome, I explained the political split of the empires. But in the last podcast, we went into the religious split of the church. And like I was just saying, there is no difference, that the two churches and the two empires were very heavily entwined in this period of time. And we talked about the representation of the two different churches prior to the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks, by the Muslims in the 15th century. 1453 is when Mohammed finally conquered Constantinople, and this was the most impressive Christian cathedral prior to that conquest, Hagia Sophia, which has been turned into a mosque, and you can see the minarets now. That it took centuries for the Muslims to conquer Constantinople and turn Hagia Sophia into a mosque. And today, in the 21st century, you have the Pope laying out the red carpet for the Muslims, if you will, or the red prayer rug, laying out the red prayer rug for them. And so eventually, I mean, if you know the history of Islam, there's going to be just like there's minarets around Hagia Sophia now, there will eventually, because you're opening the door, laying out the red prayer rug for the Muslims, that if you know what Muslims seek to do, they seek to conquer, just like the Turks conquered Hagia Sophia and put the minarets up. You're going to have minarets at St. Peter's Basilica. Because that's what they do. You're opening the door. You're not going to have to conquer St. Peter's Basilica the way they conquered Hagia Sophia. You're opening up the door for them. You're laying out the red carpet or the red prayer rug, so to speak, for them. And I mean, this is what St. Peter's Basilica is going to look like, with some minarets. So I have another clip here from Mother Miriam. We played a clip from Mother Miriam in the last podcast. She's the Catholic nun. And, she's been commenting on this. What's going on with this new Pope? Speaking of Pope Leo, and calling for communion between Islam and Christianity, and creating the prayer room in the Vatican. So this is another clip from Mother Miriam. Take a listen.
We have an email from somebody who writes in anonymously from New Hampshire, who says, I do not understand the recent embrace of Islam by the Vatican. How do we reconcile this with facts? Islam does not embrace the same God that we do. They do not believe Christ is God. They believe in conversion by the sword. Although we should love all, Our Lady appeared at Fatima not without intention, but to embrace Islam baffles my mind. Dear Anonymous, I think it baffles God's mind too. I think it's not at all of God. We do not embrace Islam. We embrace Islamists, Muslims, as Christ embraced us, to bring them to the truth. Not to pray with them, not to be united with them, because to be united with them is to unite ourselves with Satan. And so, no, it's very puzzling. I think this Pope has a sincere desire for so-called unity and to reconcile everybody. But unity apart from truth is not unity.
She's absolutely right.
It's leading everybody to hell, not
She's
to life.
Absolutely right.
And so it's a great heartache. The same thing of his embracing and congratulating the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is a woman, which means she can't be a priest, no matter her position or title.
So I really like Mother Miriam, but I'm playing this clip from her again to show that even within the Catholic Church, that there's people that are against what this Pope is doing. I shared with you what Vatican II, what the Vatican II Council said about the relationship between the Church and Islam in the last podcast, and there's a lot of Catholics that don't agree with Vatican II. There was this huge break within the Catholic Church as a response to Vatican II. And if you understand Vatican II, usually a church council is called because there is a doctrinal issue or something that needs to be worked out. There was nothing that was a doctrinal issue or any reason that Vatican II needed to be called in the 1960s, other than what they said was to modernize the church. And like I said in the last podcast, they postmodernized the church because the postmodern movement started in the 1960s. So that's what Vatican II was. I learned recently, since the last podcast, which is very interesting. I heard someone say it, and then I looked it up, and I asked the question: the Second Vatican Council, did the Jesuits influence the Second Vatican Council? I just typed in Vatican Council, Jesuit influence. Look at what came back. And I'd heard this, like I said, I heard another podcaster say this, and I looked it up for myself. Jesuit influence on the Second Vatican Council. The Society of Jesus played a significant role in shaping the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965, both as participants in its deliberations and as leaders in implementing its reforms. Jesuits are among the most active and influential voices in the council's debates. They contributed to the discussions on Agira na Mito, updating the church, ecumenism, and the adaptation of Catholicism to the modern world, postmodernism. Their expertise in education, missions, and theology allowed them to influence key documents such as the Sacro Sanctum, the liturgy. So the Jesuits played a influential role. And when I saw this, man, I was like, wow, it makes sense. That makes sense because what's going on now with this merger between the church and Catholicism, like I said, it didn't start with Pope Leo. Pope Leo's carrying on the mission, but it started with Pope Francis, who's the first Jesuit Pope. And I explained to you in the last podcast how Pope Francis, they forced Benedict out and he had to resign because of the scandals in the church. And then Francis comes in. He's the first Jesuit Pope. So this is a Jesuit mission. The Jesuit, man, when I found out about this, I was like, well, this makes all the sense in the world. This makes all the sense in the world because the Jesuits, if you know anything about it, it's so funny that everybody is focusing on the Jews. Oh, the Jews are running everything. The Jews are this society, this shadowy society that is running political things and everything behind the scenes. People don't even know anything about the Jesuits. If you understood who the Jesuits were, and even from the beginning, their foundation created during the Council of Trent. What was the Council of Trent? Council of Trent was the church council that was called in response to what was the problem. Like I said, there's usually a problem that precedes a church council being called because the council is called to deal with that problem. Vatican II, there was no problem. They just called the council to modernize the church, postmodernize the church. But the Council of Trent, there was a problem, and the reason that council was called, and the council was called to address this problem. What was the problem? The problem was the Protestant Reformation. The Council of Trent was called directly to deal with the Protestant Reformation, and the Jesuits the order was created as a military order during that council. See, the reason that people don't see the split between the Western and Eastern Church as a split and the first split because it didn't produce this huge war between the Eastern and Western Church where they're, and after the split, that they go to war with each other and they're fighting with each other. After the Protestant Reformation, there was 30 years of war, even longer, of bloodshed. I mean, the Irish were shedding blood, Protestant and Catholic blood, well into the 21st century. So, or the 20th century, the Irish were still shedding blood. So years and years of bloodshed, years and years of war that preceded the Protestant and Catholic split. You didn't have that in the split between the Western and Eastern Church. So I think that's why people don't really, the Great Schism and the split between the Western and Eastern Church doesn't really stand out, because there wasn't this major bloodshed that preceded it. But during the Protestant Reformation, there was 30 years of war. And who was leading that war? Who was the generals? The Jesuits. The Jesuits. People talk about how many countries the Jews have been expelled out of. Well, pay attention. Look at how many countries the Jesuits were expelled out of. And why were the Jesuits expelled out of Portugal, Spain, all these different places? Because they were doing all the things that people accused the Jews of doing. So when I learned that the Jesuits played a major role in the Vatican II Council, it all started to add up for me. Pope Francis, the first Jesuit Pope, that he's the one who is creating the Abrahamic Family Center that we talked about in the last podcast, this Universalist center that's got a synagogue, a mosque, and a church. We're all going to come together. It all started with the Jesuit Pope, and it all started with the Jesuits in Vatican II Council. So I've been noticing some things, and you guys have been here with me. We've been talking about this, noticing some things, and the whole reason that I got started on the series of podcasts talking about the Jewish history, and now transitioning and talking about Catholic history, because it's very important, because like I told you, the church history had an influence on Jewish history, and it just has. And we've been charting this. We've been talking about all of this. But I said that the reason that I started talking about this was after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, everyone saying that the Jews were responsible for killing Charlie Kirk, and there was this big conspiracy theory that it was the Jews. And who's pushing the conspiracy theories? Candace Owens here. Nick Fuentes wasn't really pushing the conspiracy theories, but these guys, they're over the last, and it hasn't even been a year since Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Charlie Kirk was assassinated in September. So I guess it's been about 6 months, a little bit over 6 months. You can see that the stature of both of these individuals and others who we're going to talk about has increased. That Charlie Kirk was the one who was influencing young men. He was the major influence on young men in the country. He's gone. He's taken out. And who steps in to replace him? Who's the biggest influence on young men? It's this guy. And Nick Fuentes is a Catholic. Nick Fuentes is a proud Catholic. He preaches on his show not only Christianity but Catholicism specifically. And so Charlie Kirk wasn't a Catholic, even though we're going to talk about that here in a moment. That since Charlie Kirk has been assassinated, there are people that have tried to make him out to be a Catholic. But Charlie Kirk's influence was not leading young men to Catholicism. Nick Fuentes is actively leading young men to not only Christianity, to Catholicism. And Candace Owens as well has expressed her Catholicism. I'm a Catholic now and all this stuff. So this article just came out today, just came out yesterday. And it says, why has Christ is King become a controversial statement? And you can see here, it's got Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is the one who said that Christ is King is anti-Semitic. And it's got Nick Fuentes here, and it's got Candace Owens. And I don't think this is by accident at all. I want you to listen to what Nick Fuentes says here on his show. Take a listen.
Hey, Nick, you're actually retarded. Without the Protestant Reformation, you wouldn't be allowed to read the Bible, you establishment cuck.
And probably for the better, actually.
So someone sends in $50 is what it looks like. Sexy Goy sends a $50 donation to Nick Fuentes so he can read his message. And this is the message. Hey, Nick, you're actually retarded. Without the Protestant Reformation, you wouldn't be allowed to read the Bible, you establishment cuck. And that's absolutely true. Before the Protestant Reformation, all of the masses, all of the copies of the Bible were all in Latin. It was illegal to translate the Latin Bible into any other language. In Europe, you weren't, I mean, this is what, initiated many of the wars, that, Luther was trying to translate the Bible into German, into, the, common German language that everyone read so they could all read the Bible. In England, William Tyndale was trying to, translate, or he actually did, both of them did translate the Bible from Latin into English. Tyndale was burnt at the stake for the crime of translating the Bible from Latin into English. So this is the question that is raised to Nick Fuentes, or not a question, it's a statement saying that if it wasn't for the Protestant Reformation, we wouldn't even be able to read the Bible. Now listen to what Nick Fuentes says here.
Hey, Nick, you're actually retarded. Without the Protestant Reformation, you wouldn't be allowed to read the Bible, you establishment cuck.
And probably for the better, actually. People reading the Bible is what gave us like transgender pastors, and it gave us...
Probably for the better. It would have been better, is what Nick Fuentes said, if the Bible had never been translated in common language, that we would never be able to have read the Bible, and we had to take the priest's word who learned this dead language of Latin. We have to take his word for what was in the Bible. We couldn't read it himself. And he says probably for now, would Charlie Kirk ever say anything like this? Charlie Kirk would never say anything like this at all. But now Charlie Kirk is gone. He's been taken out. And who's influencing young men? This guy who's pushing young men towards Catholicism and saying things like, you shouldn't be reading the Bible.
Hey, Nick, you're actually retarded. Without the Protestant Reformation, you wouldn't be allowed to read the Bible, you establishment cuck.
And probably for the better, actually. People reading the Bible is what gave us like transgender pastors, and it gave us Stephen
It's ridiculous.
Anderson, and it gave us a lot of it. Like, we would be better off, I think, if we didn't. And I think we'd be better off if we didn't, if we received.
We would be better off if we didn't read the Bible. We'd be better off if we didn't read the Bible, is what Nick Fuentes says.
Give us a lot of it. Like, we would.
Now, if Charlie Kirk was still alive, what would he be saying about this? About what Nick Fuentes is saying? What would he be saying? Would he just be letting it slide, or what? What would he be saying? What would Charlie Kirk be saying about all the stuff that Tucker Carlson is saying now? That many of these podcasters, what would he say? Charlie Kirk being taken out allowed many of these podcasters that are, you know who I'm talking about? These guys, Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, you know who they are. Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, you know who they are. That what would Charlie Kirk be saying if he was still alive? Now I'm starting to see it was important to take Charlie Kirk out for somebody, but not the Jews. Well, I mean, everybody's making this case that Charlie Kirk was turning on the Jews. Charlie Kirk was writing a book about Shabbat when he was killed. What are you talking about? And he was turning on the Jews.
And it gave us a lot of it. Like, we would be better off, I think, if we didn't. And I think we'd be better off if we didn't, if we received instruction from the clerics.
Formidable Youth sent $27. The minorities.
Yeah, we would be better off if we weren't reading the Bible and if we were receiving instruction from the clerics. This guy wants to take us back to the Dark Ages. So I just want to show you how this goes on. So since Charlie Kirk has been taken from us, he was assassinated. There have been many that have tried to say that Charlie Kirk was in the process of converting to Catholicism. One of those people is Dr. Taylor Marshall. Taylor Marshall is a Catholic author, a Catholic podcaster himself, and he is a quite frankly an apologist. He's a defender of the Catholic faith, and this is back in. You can look at the date here, October 8th, 2025. So Charlie Kirk was killed on September 10th. So this is less than a month after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. This is Dr. Taylor Marshall. Take a listen to what he said.
And what we've seen is many on the intellectual right, okay, Republican, conservative, a gravitation towards Catholicism.
So what we're seeing is Dr. Marshall says the intellectuals on the right, what we're seeing is a gravitation towards Catholicism.
It's infantile. Tucker Carlson calls him out on it. And what we've seen is many on the intellectual right, okay, Republican, conservative, a gravitation towards Catholicism. I'm part of it. Certainly Candace Owens is a part of it. Many voices, Megyn Kelly, J.D. Vance, even Nick Fuentes, they're coming at...
Listen to who he names. Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, J.D. Vance, that the intellectual right is making a move towards Catholicism.
Conservative, a gravitation towards Catholicism. I'm part of it. Certainly Candace Owens is a part of it. Many voices, Megyn Kelly, J.D. Vance, even Nick Fuentes, they're coming at politics from a Christian, but specifically a Catholic point of view. All right. This is what's in my new book, Christian Patriot. This is theology. And what I was explaining to Jason Whitlock is this controversy. I'm going to go over the tweet that has been, not the tweet, the text message from Charlie Kirk in which he says, this is leaving me no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause.
Now, as I was preparing for this podcast, I started to think about these These are the text messages that were leaked to Candace Owens, and then she dropped these, and it's like, oh, Candace Owens isn't just, I mean, she hasn't dropped anything else. I mean, remember in the beginning, she brought out these text messages and she was getting all this information. And it was like, whoa, she's producing receipts. You know, maybe there's something here. She hasn't produced any receipts in months. But I started to think about these text messages. And how do we even know these text messages are authentic? You have the guys from a Turning Point to come out and say, yeah, these are authentic. But Charlie's not here to say that these are authentic. How do we know that Charlie even said this? What if the guys from Turning Point that said that this is authentic, maybe what if they're in on it? I got my tinfoil hat on. What if they made up these text messages and these text messages are not even real? And Charlie Kirk is not here to say, hey, I didn't tweet that. I didn't say that. I don't even know that these text messages are real. Candace Owens just gets them and then she starts reading them and it's Charlie Kirk saying, I lost another Jewish donor today that I have to leave the Israeli cause. Again, Charlie Kirk was writing a book. It makes it point. So these text messages make it look like Charlie Kirk was separating from his support for the Jews. And then they put the Jews and Israel together. He says, you know, the text messages, even if they are authentic, he's talking about the nation of Israel. He's not talking about the Jews. They're making it seem like that Charlie Kirk was separating from his support from the Jewish and the Jewish people and the Jewish nation, and that he was becoming more Catholic and that he was on the verge of becoming Catholic. This is exactly what he says. And several people say this, as I'm going to show you. This is so deceptive, but we don't even know that these text messages are real. And again, Charlie Kirk's writing a book about the Sabbath. He's writing a book about Shabbat. You know, this guy, everything that he said that he loved Israel and he loved the Jewish people. But now that he's dead and he's been assassinated and taken from us, there's people that are saying that this is just less than 4 weeks after Charlie Kirk is killed. You have Dr. Taylor Marshall saying Charlie Kirk was making a transition towards Catholicism and separating from his Jewish support and using these text messages that Candace Owens brought out. I got my spidey sense up.
A Catholic point of view. All right. This is what's in my new book, Christian Patriot. This is theology. And what I was explaining to Jason Whitlock is this controversy. I'm going to go over the tweet that has been, not the tweet, the text message from Charlie Kirk in which he says, this is leaving me no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause, end quote. All right. It's right there. This is theology. and I'm going to walk you through the theology. I'm coming at this from the historic Christian point of view. All right, this is the view of every single Christian, East and West, from AD 33 all the way until the 1800s, when you have Darby and dispensationalists.
It's not true.
Schofield at the 1900s.
What he just said is not true.
Madness that infects Protestantism, evangelicalism, mainly through charismatic movements, to create a new theology that sees Israel as the current people of God. And I'm going to walk you through a simple argument, Bible verses, in which you can refute this theology in under 3 minutes. All right. First off, what is the controversy? The controversy is that our dear friend Charlie Kirk was assassinated in front of the world. There are so many loose ends on this. There was that older boomer guy who said that he did it and he was arrested. There is the story of Tyler, who was on the roof, who exchanged texts with his trans boyfriend that seem artificial. There is the idea that he was shot with a 30-06 and there was no exit. There's all sorts of things that the more we know, the less certain this becomes. And to complicate things, we have seen that Charlie Kirk himself was developing in his political views, but as it relates to theology, I'm just going to give you a timeline and some facts of what we know about Charlie Kirk. Because if Charlie Kirk is moving towards a more Catholic worldview,
Charlie Kirk's moving towards a more Catholic worldview, is what he says. Charlie Kirk's moving towards a more Catholic worldview.
Because if Charlie Kirk is moving towards a more Catholic worldview, necessarily his support for Israel is going to decrease, if not go away.
Wow. Dr. Taylor Marshall, less than 4 weeks after Charlie Kirk is assassinated, suggesting that Charlie Kirk is moving towards Catholicism. And if that's the truth, if he was moving towards Catholicism, then that would necessarily mean that he was moving away from his support of Israel and his support of Jews. That's what he said. Wow.
Catholic worldview, necessarily his support for Israel is going to decrease, if not go away. All right. People need to understand that politics is downstream from theology. That's what I'm arguing in this manifesto, Christian Patriot. The reason countries in the West have become slums and degenerate is because they have moved away from Jesus Christ.
All right. Get a little bit of another clip here for him. This is kind of long, but I'm making a case that I have to show you guys because this just became clear to me, and it was like a light bulb that came on. All right, let's listen to more of Dr. Taylor here. Marshall Taylor, if they leave his name.
Charlie Kirk.
Taylor Marshall.
I can't say that I was a friend of Charlie Kirk. We exchanged texts. We've collaborated on some podcasts. We've met, but I was not like a bro of Charlie Kirk. I knew him, but I was not a friend. But I do know what I have in my time speaking to him is that he was interested in Catholicism. He talked to me about Catholicism. There's a podcast interview of Charlie Kirk and me talking about Catholicism and what he respects about Catholicism and how he respects Catholics.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk respected all religions. He had respect, but he didn't necessarily mean just because he has respect for, and pointed out that there's some beautiful things about Catholicism, which there are, doesn't mean that he wanted to convert to Catholicism. This is absolutely ridiculous, the case that these guys are trying to make.
A podcast interview of Charlie Kirk and me talking about Catholicism and what he respects about Catholicism and how he respects Catholics.
I respect
That's
Catholics.
my engagement.
I respect Catholics. I'm not interested in converting to Catholicism. And there's some serious reasons, theological reasons, why I am not interested in converting to Catholicism. It doesn't mean that I can't respect Catholics and I don't have respect for my Catholic friends and my Catholic brothers. I mean, so it's ridiculous making the case after Charlie Kirk is assassinated that this guy was moving towards Catholicism. And Dr. Marshall is not the only one that is making this case, as you're getting ready to see. But I think that there's more to this, and just hear me out.
To me about Catholicism, there's a podcast interview of Charlie Kirk and me talking about Catholicism and what he respects about Catholicism and how he respects Catholics. That's my engagement. That's the limit of my engagement with Charlie Kirk and as it goes with Catholicism. We also know that Charlie Kirk said that Protestants should show more veneration or respect to the Virgin Mary. Charlie Kirk said that devotion to the Virgin Mary is the antidote to feminism and to what is toxic in our culture.
He said that.
We know that Charlie Kirk attended Mass. We know that he went to Mass the Sunday before he lost his life.
We know that he attended Mass. I mean, maybe he went to a Catholic service. I've been to a Catholic service. That doesn't mean that I am converting to Catholicism. If Charlie Kirk wanted to convert to Catholicism, why didn't he convert to Catholicism? I don't understand this, that we know that he went to a Catholic Mass.
To feminism and to what is toxic in our culture. We know that Charlie Kirk attended Mass. We know that he went to Mass the Sunday before he lost his life. We know that he had a Catholic priest over to his home to bless him before this tragedy happened. We know within the weeks, I think it was 2 weeks, maybe within 2 weeks before this tragedy, he met with the local Catholic bishop. He was talking to other Catholics, friends of his, like Jack Posobiec, like Candace Owens, many others, including a priest. When he lost his life, he was wearing a St. Michael medal. Not a lot of evangelical Protestants do that.
I've never heard about this St. Michael medal anywhere other than Dr. Taylor Marshall saying this, but you understand what's going on. He's trying to make the case that Charlie Kirk was transitioning into becoming a Catholic, which necessarily meant that he was moving away for support for Israel.
Wearing a St. Michael medal. Not a lot of evangelical Protestants do that, wear medals of saints around their neck. He's also wearing a cross. God bless him. Candace Owens says he was praying the rosary.
All right. Candace Owens says that he was praying the rosary. Candace Owens had a lot more to say than that. What did Charlie Kirk say? Well, this is Charlie Kirk speaking in May of last year, before he was assassinated in September. And this is when Charlie Kirk was commenting on the election of the new Pope, Pope Leo. Take a listen to what he says in his own words.
Hey, everybody, there is a new Pope, and the Pope is from Chicago. What do we actually know about this new Pope? Well, the Pope is from Chicago. I am as well. He served in Peru. By the way, I'm not Catholic, by the way. I'm evangelical, but it's still...
By the way, I'm not Catholic. I'm evangelical. This was in May. This is in May before he was shot. I'm not Catholic. I'm evangelical.
As well, he served in Peru. By the way, I'm not Catholic, by the way. I'm evangelical, but it still matters who the Pope is. He is a registered Republican and voted in Republican primaries. And
so anyway, I'm not Catholic. I'm evangelical is what he said in May. Now, Charlie Kirk's not the type of person. A lot of people think that you become Catholic because you're raised in a Catholic family. Your family was Catholic. You don't think about, theology or religion. And, my family's Catholic. We've always been Catholic. I'm a Catholic. Or my family's Protestant. We've always been Protestant. I'm a Protestant. I don't even know anything about theology or the theological differences between Catholics and Protestants. I mean, I was born into this. This is what I am. It's the way most people are. Charlie Kirk's not like that. Charlie Kirk's not a person who makes decisions like that. Charlie Kirk was the type of person that gave deep thought to theological issues, to issues of life, to issues of the world. He was a very deep thinker, kind of like me. Like that the reason that I'm not Catholic, it's not just because I was born into a Protestant family. I can tell you specifically the theological and reasons that I'm not a Catholic and that I reject Catholicism. Doesn't mean I can't have respect for Catholics and that we can't have debates about theology and still have dinner and break bread and all of that doesn't mean that. But I'm not a Catholic, and I've thought about the reasons, and it's an intellectual reason that I have come to that I'm not a Catholic. And I'm sure that Charlie Kirk was not a Catholic for the same reason. This is him in May. Now, people were saying, well, he was evolving, is what Dr. Taylor Marshall said. He was evolving, making this, pivot towards Catholicism. And people convert to, different religions all the time. Was Charlie Kirk in that transition, as Dr. Taylor Marshall says, was he in that transition of converting to Catholicism? Well, in May, he says, I'm not a Catholic, I'm an evangelical. This is what Candace Owens starts saying after he is assassinated, after Charlie Kirk is assassinated, and she claims to be a newfound Catholic. Take a listen to what she says.
But, not close enough to publicly acknowledge in front of the evangelical donors. Charlie was evangelical. Doesn't matter if he was going to mass every day. Go after Candace for telling the truth because donors. Okay, weird. Anyway, he was the bishop until...
So he was going to mass every day. And then she's saying, well, Charlie was evangelical. Even doesn't matter that he was going, she's not saying that he was converting to Catholicism, but she's saying, well, yeah, he couldn't really say that he was converting to Catholicism, but he was still going to mass every day. He just wasn't letting on. This is after he's dead. After Charlie Kirk is assassinating, this is what people, Candace Owens, Dr. Taylor Marshall, and others are saying that Charlie Kirk was making this transition toward Catholicism. And it's interesting, again, going back to people like Nick Fuentes, that Nick Fuentes is the one that is leading the young men now. He stepped into the space that the gap, the void that was left by Charlie Kirk. He stepped into it and he started leading young men to embrace Catholicism. Because, what would Charlie Kirk be saying if he was alive right now? What would Charlie Kirk be saying about Nick Fuentes? What would Charlie Kirk be saying about Tucker Carlson? What would Charlie Kirk be saying about Megyn Kelly? What would he be saying about the Pope, calling for communion between Muslims and Christians? What would this guy be saying? But now I'm starting to see that other people could have had a motive in his assassination besides the Jews. Besides the Jews. Here's another clip of Candace Owens. What is she saying about Charlie Kirk after he's dead?
I lie. I reflect on that moment. And I think it was right after the memorial service, a couple of days after the memorial service, where Alex Clark released that interview with her and Andrew Colvett, and they struggle sessioned through that. They were like, no, they were both committed evangelicals, and him and Erica, and he liked the smells and the bells. He loved the architecture, but there was no more substance for him. I really struggled with that, and I struggle with it even more now that I know that Charlie Kirk, there's been a lot of questions about what about his burial? How come we haven't seen anything about his burial? We saw so much and then we saw nothing. And the reason that's like a big hush-hush secret is because Charlie had a Catholic funeral mass. And
so she says, I know Charlie had a Catholic funeral mass. And that's why they're keeping his burial and his funeral secret, because Charlie had a Catholic mass and he was going to mass every day, is what she says. But then just last week, she tweeted this out. Was Charlie Kirk cremated? What are you talking about? Was Charlie Kirk cremated? Girl, you just said that he had a Catholic funeral and a Catholic mass and now you're asking, was he cremated? This girl is such a fraud. But I'm starting to see the whole play. This is one that just made me sick. This is edited by this shadowy group. I don't know who's funding this group, but you remember just a few weeks ago, they had their event in Washington, D.C., Catholics for Catholics. And they had Carrie Bowler that she spoke there, Candace Owens. They brought in Joe Kemp and all this stuff. So, and this is a video that they edited of Candace Owens from her show. Take a listen to what she says here.
You know, I think Charlie was definitely on the brink of changing some of his perspectives. And I can tell you factually, Charlie was praying the rosary. Charlie was going to Mass. One of my last conversations with Charlie was me joking with him saying, just make the last step, okay? You are, I said specifically, you're too smart to be a Protestant. Just take the last step, Charlie.
You're too smart to be a Protestant. Just take the last step. And listen to the music, how they've edited in the music. They have a couple of pictures of Charlie Kirk in a Catholic church with his family. Who knows why he was in the Catholic church. I know that he said that he was evangelical and that he was Protestant and that he was a lot smarter than you, woman. A lot smarter than you. He knew a lot more about theology than you're gonna be mean. But he knew a lot more about theology than you. He was too smart to be a Protestant.
Last step, okay? You are, I said specifically, you're too smart to be a Protestant. Just take the last step, Charlie. He says, ha ha. Speaking about Mary. And typically, when those steps start taking place, you stop referring to yourself, as I did, as a Judeo-Christian.
All right. So what did Charlie Kirk refer to himself as? Well, this is just minutes before Charlie Kirk was taken from us. Just minutes before he was shot and his life was ended on the spot. This is what Charlie Kirk said at the event in Utah where he was assassinated. Take a listen.
So everything I say, everybody, I'm an evangelical Christian. We're going to have fun with this, but I'm not one of those.
I'm an evangelical Christian is what he says. It's just moments before he's shot.
Everybody, I'm an evangelical Christian.
I'm an evangelical Christian just moments before he was shot. I'm an evangelical Christian.
I say, everybody, I'm an evangelical Christian. We're going to have fun with this, but I'm not one of those guys that hates on Mormons or calls names on Mormons.
Oh, so he respects Mormons too. Maybe he was converting into Mormonism. Dr. Marshall? Maybe he says that he respects Mormons, that he's not going to hate on the Mormons. So maybe he was converting to Mormonism too because he respects them as well. How ridiculous is this? This is just moments before he's shot. I'm an evangelical Christian. If Charlie Kirk was converting to Catholicism, why didn't he convert to Catholicism? And it's wrong for people after he's assassinated to try to make this guy out to be a Catholic and say that he was converting to Catholicism. What's the motive behind that? What is this about? This is another clip of Candace Owens. Take a listen to what she says here. Now, this is in regards to the military action in Iran, and she's listen to what she says here. It's just hilarious.
The fact that they're quite literally getting community noted on X right now for just making up stuff that Charlie would have said or thought, despite all of the evidence to the contrary regarding the Iranian war. Could you imagine you leave this earth and the people who take over the empire that you built, the business empire that you built, are now trying to make people believe that you would have said the opposite and believed the opposite of the things that you said while you were on this earth.
So she's talking about Iran and she's saying, can you believe that people are trying to, put words in Charlie Kirk's mouth now that he is taken from us and, making say the opposite of what he actually said when he was alive. Well, when Charlie Kirk was alive, actually up until just the minute before he was assassinated and taken from us, he was saying he was an evangelical Christian, and you are going around saying that he was in the process of converting to Catholicism. And Dr. Taylor Marshall is going around saying that he was in the process of converting to Catholicism. What is that about? What is that about? All right. So we're going to get more into this in the next podcast because I still have a very little bit more that I want to share, but we're going to have to get into the, into chapter Matthew chapter 16. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the papacy and what, the papacy, particularly this papal crest that we were talking about in the last, couple of podcasts. Where does this authority come from and what does this mean? And it goes back to Matthew chapter 16. And it's very important that I take you through that book. We're going to do that in the next podcast. But this is the papal crest. And what does this mean? Well, this is called the papal tiara. And this is a 3-crown tiara that the Pope wears. And the top crown represents his authority over spiritual things. The middle crown represents the Pope's authority over doctrinal things. And the bottom crown represents the Pope's authority over temporal things, temporal authority. And the keys, again, reiterate that the gold key represents the Pope's spiritual authority, and then the silver key represents the Pope's temporal authority. So we're going to go to the book of Matthew, chapter 16, in the next podcast. We're going to break down where this authority comes from. But before we get out of today's podcast, I want to talk more about why it is what Pope Leo is doing with this merger of Christianity, particularly Catholicism and Islam, what Pope Francis was doing, what they put in and stated in the Vatican II Council. All of that is against Christianity. It's not Christianity anymore when you're saying that there is a second plan of salvation for the Muslims, that Christians have one plan of salvation and Muslims have another plan of salvation. And why this is very dangerous for Christians, what these past 2 popes are doing, and then what the Jesuits did in Vatican II. But we're going to listen to Pastor Josh Howerton talk a little bit about the differences between Christianity and Islam, and the Christian Jesus and the Islamic Jesus. And this will be the last clip that we play. But there's some significant differences that make us different. We don't have a universal belief that ties us together, Christians and Muslims. Christians do not believe in the same God as Muslims. Muslims do not believe in the same Jesus as Muslims. There's some differences in that you can see here, that Christians believe that Jesus was crucified and resurrected. Muslims don't believe that Jesus was ever crucified or resurrected. The second person in the Trinity. Jesus is the second person in the Trinity. There's no Trinity in Islam. That Jesus is not God. Jesus is not to be worshiped, or Jesus is to be worshiped. And in Islam, Jesus is not to be worshiped. Jesus is the truth in Christianity. Allah is the greatest liar in Islam. Salvation is by Christ alone in Christianity, but not in according to Vatican II. According to Vatican II, that Christianity, Christ is not, salvation is not by Christ alone. There's a second plan, or a different plan of salvation according to Vatican II. In Islam, there's no guarantee of salvation. So there's some major differences between Christianity and Islam. And take a listen to this clip.
Do not put up with anyone who redefines Jesus Christ. Jesus defines Jesus. Tucker posted this, and it was the first time that made me go, hey, brother, where are we right now? He said, this is his tweet, the people in charge don't want you to know this, but Muslims love Jesus too. That was what Tucker tweeted. Now, I'm trying to help you evaluate these things, because stuff like that gets real confusing. Okay, Muslims love Jesus too. What you need to know, in Islam, basically every major world religion, they have an understanding or interpretation of who Jesus was. Jesus Christ is basically the only religious world figure that every religion takes time to give an interpretation of who he was and he wasn't. So basically what they do is they redefine who Jesus was, and
who he was and who he wasn't. This is very important that you understand this, because this is Jesus's identity is at the very heart of this passage in Matthew 16 when we get into this in the next podcast. Because right here, Peter declares Jesus as Messiah. And all of this happens because Jesus asked a question to his disciples about his identity. This is in red letters. This is what Jesus asked his disciples. Who do the people say that I am? Who do the people say my identity is? Who do the people say that the Son of Man is? This is the question that precedes everything about Peter, which we'll get back into in the next podcast, about Peter and the magic keys and all of this. It all starts with this question that Jesus asked his disciples. Who do the people say that I am? Who do the people say my identity is? It's all about my identity. Who am I? Who am I, Peter? Who am I, disciples? Who do they say that I am? It's all about Jesus' identity. And the identity of Jesus that Muslims have is not the same identity of Jesus that Christians have. It's all about his identity.
Every religion takes time to give an interpretation of who he was and he wasn't. So basically what they do is they redefine who Jesus was, and then they say, we love that Jesus. In Islam, they call Jesus the prophet Isa. That's what they call him. They believe he was not God. He was not crucified. He was not raised from the dead. He did not pay the penalty for our sins. He worships Allah. He preaches the Quran. He is a Muslim, and in the end, he will help violently oppose Christians in the Islamic eschatology in the end times. That is exactly what 2 Corinthians 11:4 warned against when it said this. It warned that false prophets would come that will, quote, preach to you a Jesus other than the Jesus we preach to you. And then he says about these Corinthians that are being demonically deceived, he says, when they preach to you another Jesus, in other words, they're redefining Jesus and getting you to accept a totally different demonic person just with the same name. He's saying, you put up with it readily enough. Can I say something to you, Christians? Do not put up with anyone who redefines Jesus Christ. Jesus defines Jesus.
Actually, we're going to look in Matthew 16 in the next podcast that Peter actually defines Jesus. Jesus says, who do they say that I am? Who do they say the Son of Man is? And Peter defines Jesus. He defines it correctly. And that is the passage of scripture that Catholics lean on to support the authority of the Pope. We'll get back into that in the next podcast. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.